Welcome to the Oh So Spurs podcast. We are joined by editor of FootballEspana, Ruairidh Barlow. How are you, Ruairidh?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Sorry, it's so dark. I've had to put the dentist light on, as I call it, in my flat because of the storm we're having at the moment in Madrid. But delighted to be on, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, crazy. I'm just glad you've got electricity right now, otherwise this wouldn't be going ahead.
Which we can't take for granted these days.
No, wake up call for the world, wasn't it then? So, yeah. But thanks so much, Ruairidh, for your time today. The main topic of the conversation is a midfielder playing for Real Betis called Cardoso, who a lot of Spurs fans are very curious about, but don't know a whole lot about either. But there's been reports coming out, he's been doing well in certain spells, and our team is lacking a midfielder of a certain profile. So without diving into what that profile is, because it might bias your answers one way or the other unintentionally. Can you tell us a little bit about like how Real Betis have been doing the season and where Cardoso fits into that team?
Yeah, Real Betis they've had a very funny season because about 5 months into the season, Real Betis, we thought that this was maybe the end of the Manuel Pellegrini cycle. They were struggling to win games. They weren't playing kind of free-flowing football. So they really looked as if it was going to be kind of a tired kind of trudge into kind of 8th or 9th place for them when they've been qualifying for European football. But since January, they've been maybe one of the best 3 or 4 teams in La Liga. They've been absolutely exceptional. The arrival of Antony, which I know sounds strange in England these days, but the arrival of Antony, the return of Isco from injury has really kind of kick-started their season. And now they're playing kind of free-flowing, fun football. It's very kind of spread out, open, a lot of time and space for the Blair players. And Cardoso is a part of that. He's been an addition that came in, I think it was January, must be last year now. But yeah, he came in as kind of originally a replacement for Guido Rodriguez, who was linked to Barcelona and eventually ended up at West Ham. And I think from very early on, it became clear that he was kind of a talented player, somebody that could add something to their midfield. He's physically got the capability to kind of stand up to whatever challenge is thrown at him. But positionally, he's very smart. He knows where to be. He's the sort of player that kind of really gets on top of the opposition if Betis are dominating, and someone that you can rely on to kind of put in a performance, kind of a 7 or an 8 out of 10 every week. Even if sometimes, as you're saying, he kind of has spells where he's a little bit less involved. He's the sort of player that a manager will pick every week.
Interesting. So he's got one thing important for Spurs is he's got a track record of staying fit.
Yeah. Yes, he has had a couple of injuries. He missed a couple of weeks earlier in the season, but generally he's been pretty reliable in that.
And a bit more about like how he plays. So you mentioned he's quite a physical player. Is he physical? Because we've got like different examples of what I define as physical players in the Spurs squad. You've got Dejan Kulusevski, who's physical, but in a proactive attacking sense. He can hold players off the ball when he's progressing it really well and hold the ball up well. But defensively, I wouldn't define him as physical in the same way I would Cristian Romero, as an example. Like, is he defensively physical, attacking, both? Like, yeah, could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess one of the things to say is that in Spain, at least, a lot of the central midfielders tend to be a little bit lighter on their feet, tend to be a little bit less kind of strong. And that's one of the things that Cardoso, he really stands out for, is his strength both on the ball and off the ball. You can give it to him and you know that he can kind of hold off a challenge. And similarly, you know that he's going to put in a challenge and make life pretty uncomfortable if kind of say a midfielder picks up the ball back to goal. You know Cardoso is going to be right there and giving him very little room to breathe. I think also one of the things that we're seeing increasingly with kind of more open styles or more kind of vertical games, go back and forth a lot more. Cardoso has the stamina to kind of keep up his level for at least kind of 80 minutes and really kind of show that, or really kind of run that midfield for a long spell of the game. And that's one of the things that I think is becoming increasingly important. If you get a lot of midfielders that can give you kind of 60 minutes, but with the number of games these days, with the kind of consistency of these games, it's very hard to keep up that level for a long time. So I think in terms of strength, he's very good. He's quite mobile as well. He's not necessarily the quickest across the ground, but you notice that he's kind of across the pitch and can cover ground well. So I think he's somebody that holds up to the modern rigors of the game in the middle of midfield, and somebody that you can rely on not to kind of get bullied, which is very important.
We did some research recently on like our transfers as Tottenham specifically, and that I don't have the data on the wider Premier League to hand to say if this is a fair stereotype, but surprisingly, when players from La Liga come to the Premier League, and Man United have got plenty of examples here as well, they often struggle, and then they go back to La Liga and they are brilliant, and then they often knock out that English side in a European competition playing them. So it's not that I don't think it's, by the sounds of it, because the leagues are vastly different levels that they struggle. But why do you think some players, being a reporter on Liga, but also understanding other European leagues well, like, why do you think that transition struggles? And do you think Cardoso is more likely to be okay with that transition based on maybe some of those assumptions as to why?
It's a fantastic question, and one that doesn't really get asked to very often. But I'd say one of the things you can point out about a lot of these players that come over from La Liga from maybe that second tier, the likes of Betis, the likes of Atleti, the likes of Villarreal, quite often those teams will base their games around these players. So, for instance, Gio Lo Celso is maybe the best example we can talk about, with Betis obviously benefiting very much from his time there. He's been very good at Villarreal, been very good at Betis, struggled at Spurs a lot. But what you saw with kind of Pellegrini in his first spell at Betis and then again at Villarreal is that Lo Celso was in charge of kind of running the games for those teams. And so that's where he's at his best, when he gets on the ball a lot. It does help, I think, Lo Celso in his case that the tempo is a little bit slower, but more generally, I think these players that stand out in these teams, Villarreal, Betis, Atleti, they will be very good. They will be kind of the main men for those sides. And then they come into a Spurs side that perhaps has a series of signings for 20, 30 million pounds, and they're not necessarily going to have the side based around them. They're not going to have that continuity. So I think from my point of view, I think that a lot of La Liga managers are very clever about getting the most of their resources, or getting the most out of their resources. And another good example would be Alex Moreno, who went to Villa. He was one of the best left backs in La Liga at Betis because they knew exactly what to do with him. I mean, he was a winger converted to a left back. He was going to give them the left side to dominate. They had a left winger cutting inside a lot. So yeah, I think the usage of those players in La Liga, players who are kind of 25, 26 years old quite often as well, that kind of coming into their prime, they get the best out of those players, whereas they go into a Premier League squad, quite often they're not necessarily first choice. And then you just don't get the side based around you in the same way, which I think is maybe a little bit of a difference. And those players that are kind of more squad players for La Liga are not going to be of quite the same levels. Yeah, I think that is part of it. So change of climate, change of weather, change of kind of atmosphere as well. I think it is a little bit of a different kind of lifestyle, and maybe especially a lot of those players come across from South America. Spain is a lot similar, a lot easier to adapt to. Whereas you go to England, if you don't necessarily speak the language, if you're not kind of comfortable in your living situation, I mean, as somebody who spent time like kind of traveling through England, it's very different to go from Seville to Manchester, for example. They're polar opposites of places. So yeah, I think you arrive, you're not necessarily the main man. Everything is different around you. I think it's quite a hard adaptation process. So yeah, that's maybe a few of the causes. In terms of the style of the league, which is probably what you're more interested in. I'll stop rambling now. But in terms of the style of the league, I think, yeah, there is a faster pace. So those players that get on the ball a little bit more are more benefited in La Liga. Physically, I think that's a question that kind of comes up. If you're good enough, I think you can cope with it. David Silva being the perfect example. But yeah, I think it depends on the player, but also there's factors in there that change.
Yeah, and that one of the best things I think that could have ever happened for England as a football team right now was for Jude Bellingham to not stay in the Premier League, to not go to a Premier League club, and to go to La Liga like he has. I think there's definitely lessons to be learned that the Spanish clubs have an excellent track record of developing players, and many of the larger Premier League clubs you see, I think Man United, I don't know why I keep bringing them up today, but they're a prime example, I think, of a club who've got the ability to buy lots of world-class young talents, bring them into their academies early, poach them from other academies early, but not as many of them make it through to their potential as a club like Real Madrid seems to do, or a Barcelona actually is probably a better example of a club that is just incredible at doing this. Real Madrid is probably a better example of buying players and helping elevate them, whereas Barcelona, endless examples of how they do it so well. Back to Cardoso for a second, and I did actually want to ask you about Romero as well at some point, if that's okay, just about these rumours, to see if they're as strong in Spain as they are in England. Cardoso, there's a £21 million buy clause Spurs have as a first refusal to basically buy him this summer. And there's been occasional reports saying yeah, that's happening, that's all done, it's going to be announced. Others saying, no, it's not. What do you hear in Spain about that? And do you think that's good value? Would Spurs be silly not to, or is it a fee that's just kind of worth considering? What's your view on that?
In terms of the fee and the price point, I think it's for me it's a no-brainer. I mean, at his age, you're going to get kind of a sell-on fee for him. He's a player that's done very, very well in terms of what he's shown, at least in Europe so far. In terms of adaptation to the Premier League, again, he's not a player that takes 70, 80 touches a game. So it's not like that pace of the league is going to be as much of a factor for me. So I think for me, it is a no-brainer for Spurs. What we've been hearing in Spain is that he has offers. I think Spurs will be an option for him, but it kind of comes down to what else is offered to him and what other clubs come in for him. I think Betis would be delighted to hang on to him, but I just don't see in this market other teams not coming in for him and not offering that. I would expect them to be able to get 30 to 40 million from another club if it isn't Spurs that it goes to. So yeah, I think in terms of that, it's an absolute no-brainer for Spurs if you do it, because you're taking a risk. 25 million. I mean, for instance, Lucas Bergvall, very talented youngster, but not yet kind of made as a player. I mean, I don't know what he ended up costing, but that was about 10 million, and you look at half the price nearly for a player that is kind of developed, now has European experience in European competitions, that is held up against the likes of Atleti, Real Madrid, Barcelona. I think for me, yeah, if you're Daniel Levy, you'd pull the trigger on that, no question of that.
Interesting. I didn't realise that. I thought with this reverse refusal, Spurs basically had pre-agreed some kind of contract or whatever, but I assume not then. So from your understanding, all that means is they have to accept the fee, but the player hasn't agreed to any contract or anything. So say they could accept 30 million from, just say Man City, whoever, and the player can just obviously choose them if they want to instead.
Yes, so Cardoso still could reject Spurs, which is not the message I want to send on the Oso Spurs podcast. But yeah, Cardoso hasn't agreed to anything as far as I understand.
Interesting. Okay, that's interesting. So you'll probably know more about another situation than I do. Well, you will. So being an editor for an actual tabloid and living in Spain, but Cristian Romero, links to him are ramping up. I mean, Spurs fans' perspective, 99% of us are of the belief, like you mentioned earlier, South American. He must be thinking, you just assume Spain is going to be a nicer transition for his family and, well, a more like-for-like transition coming from that kind of part of the world in terms of climate, language, culture, etc., etc. So there's that. Obviously, the clubs that are linked to him are massive clubs like Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid. So you've got to be honest as well. They are bigger brands and clubs than Spurs. So he's not got any reason to say, well, no, I'm North London through and through, didn't you know? He's most likely going to take it if he can. Are you hearing those clubs? But he's going to cost a lot of money. I'm kind of getting to as well. Do you see either of those clubs making that move? Are those rumours strong in Spain as well?
I think it will come down to that price point, as you say. If I was Spurs, I wouldn't actually worry too much about Real Madrid, because Real Madrid have been very, very kind of feared is the wrong word, because they did spend 100 something million on Jude Bellingham, and they're paying Kylian Mbappe quite a bit too. But they've been very kind of centered on this strategy of, if we're going to spend big, it has to be on a player that is under the age of 22, 23. And given that Romero will cost money, I don't expect Real Madrid to move for him. Atleti is a different case. I mean, as you were saying, the climate, the atmosphere, the similarities to Argentina in terms of culture. Not that any Argentines will thank me for saying that, but it is more similar than England. But yeah, you just have to look at the quantity of Uruguayans and Argentines that played for Atletico Madrid. Diego Simeone is very skilled at attracting kind of Argentines to his club, and seems to have something of a line, a vibe with these players. And I expect the charm of them to come on very strong. Julian Alvarez has obviously moved there and done very well this season. Angel Correa has been there a long time. I think with Atleti, you will see them move for him. I think Romero is the ideal signing for them, someone coming into his prime, someone who is kind of that kind of Simeone mold, somebody that doesn't mind mixing it up a little bit more, somebody that has character. So I think you will see them move for him. Would they go as high as 70 million? I don't quite know. That said, I didn't expect them to spend quite so much on Julian Alvarez. I think with Romero, it will come down to kind of that price point, what they're willing to spend. I think Atleti will also try and throw a player or two into the negotiations and see if they can kind of bring that price down. if the deal can be done for 50 to 60 million, I expect it to be done. If it's 60 to 70, and again, this is more just kind of my general mindset on how I see Atletico as opposed to actual information before I get quoted and thrown onto an aggregator. But if it's kind of 70 to 80 million, then I think you might see Atleti look elsewhere.
Yeah, that's the other thing. He's got 2 years under this season. My kind of feeling is, logically, I imagine there'll be some movement, but some clubs might say, if we just wait 1 more year, that price drops quite quickly once we get to that point. They don't want him to go on a freeze. We'll watch this, but yeah, he just seems culturally, for Atleti, he is Simeone kind of on the pitch in so many ways, in the sense that I imagine he'd get a high five for a yellow card and a great crunching tackle, whereas Spurs, it's like, what are you doing? Calm down. We need you. It's just culturally, he just seems a great fit, and he is a wonderful player on his day. No one can deny
the prime
that.
example being Conor Gallagher, who in his first game, which I was at the Metropolitano, I think he did some good things in that game, but the loudest roar of the game was for him chasing down someone into the corner and throwing himself into a slide tackle that was kind of needless. It was in like the 89th minute, but everyone went absolutely wild with it. So yeah, you can imagine Romero thriving in that sort of atmosphere.
Yeah, and he was a player, actually, we were linked with endlessly, Conor Gallagher, and we're still looking for that combative midfielder. Maybe that is Cardoso. That's what we're looking for. But thanks so much, Ruairidh. I can't think of any other La Liga related topics linking back to Spurs to really quiz you on, even though I feel like I should have prepared a few more. But thank you so much for your time today. It's been brilliant. Really, really insightful.
Not a problem. An absolute delight. Yeah, I'm always very happy to discuss football. It's nice to discuss players and what they do. So, thank you very much for having me. And if you need more on La Liga and any other players, you know where.
Thanks. Cheers. Thanks, Ruairidh.